My name is Ethan Hayes. I'm 53 years old, and for 25 of those years, I was an officer with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. I've spent more nights under the stars than most people have spent in their own beds. I know the woods. I know the sounds, the smells, the way the light filters through the canopy at dawn, and the way the darkness swallows it whole at dusk. I've tracked cougars, tranquilized bears, and faced down angry moose. I thought I knew every secret the Cascade Mountains held. I was wrong. It all happened 4 years ago, at a cabin I'd built myself on a small plot of land I inherited. It wasn't a fancy place, just a sturdy, 2-room structure made from Douglas fir I'd milled myself. It was my escape, my sanctuary. It sat at the end of a 10-mile logging road that was barely passable in a good 4-wheel drive truck. When you were there, you were committed.
No cell service, no neighbors, just the wind in the trees and the rush of the Cispus River about a half-mile down the ridge. It was exactly how I liked it. That October, I'd invited my old partner, Cal, up for a long weekend. We'd retired within a year of each other and tried to make a trip like this an annual tradition. Cal was solid, quiet, observant, and the only man I'd ever fully trusted at my back. He was bringing his nephew Brian, a kid in his early 20s who worked a tech job in Seattle and thought roughing it was when the Wi-Fi went down. Cal was hoping the mountain air would do him some good. I had my doubts, but I agreed. We got up there on a Thursday afternoon. The sky was a crisp, brilliant blue, and the air was sharp with the smell of pine and damp earth. The autumn colors were just past their peak, a riot of gold and rust against the deep green of the firs. Brian was immediately out of his element, complaining about the bumpy road and the lack of a signal on his phone. He made a joke about being murdered by Bigfoot, and Cal just grunted, telling him to grab a gear bag from the truck. As we were unloading, another truck came grinding up the road. It was a slightly beat-up Tacoma, and I didn't recognize it. People rarely came this far up unless they were lost. A man and a woman got out. The man was tall and lean, with the kind of efficient, deliberate movements that spoke of training. He introduced himself as Corey, and the woman as Megan. They were campers whose planned site further down the mountain had been washed out. They'd seen my little turnoff on an old Forest Service map and hoped they could camp nearby for a night. Normally, I'd have said no. I came here for solitude. But Corey had a firm handshake and a direct gaze, and Megan looked exhausted and disappointed. I looked at Cal, who gave a slight nod.
I told them there was a clear, flat spot about 200 yards down from the cabin, near a little feeder creek. It was sheltered by a stand of old-growth cedars. Corey thanked me profusely. He mentioned he was ex-Army, and it showed. He seemed capable. Megan was quiet, offering only a small, tired smile. We settled in, got a fire going in the cabin's wood stove, and started dinner. Cal and I fell into our old rhythm, moving around the small space without needing to speak. Brian, on the other hand, was a constant stream of chatter, narrating everything he was seeing for some social media post he was composing in his head for later. He was a good kid, just loud and completely disconnected from the natural world. He represented everything I came up here to get away from. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a strange quiet fell over the forest. It's a specific kind of silence, one I'd only experienced a handful of times. It's not peaceful. It's a weighted silence, like the air itself is holding its breath. The usual evening chatter of squirrels and birds just stopped, all at once. I remember looking at Cal, and he was already looking at me, his brow furrowed. "You feel that?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah," I said. Everything just went quiet. Brian, oblivious, was trying to get a decent picture of the sunset with his phone. "Probably a predator around,"
he said, not looking up. A cougar or something. Cool. Then we heard it. It wasn't a growl or a scream. It was a single, explosive sound from deep in the woods to the north. A sharp, percussive crack that echoed off the ridge. It was the sound of a thick, living tree trunk being snapped in half. I've heard trees fall in storms, and I've heard loggers work. This was neither. It was too sudden, too violent. It sounded like a giant had just broken a baseball bat the size of a telephone pole. Cal and I were on our feet instantly.
Brian finally looked up from his phone, his eyes wide.
What the hell was that? Deadfall, maybe? Cal said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was looking out the north window into the darkening woods. No, I said, shaking my head. That wasn't a dead tree. That was green wood. And it wasn't a fall. It was a break. We stood there for a long time listening, but the silence just deepened. The sound had been so singular, so out of place that it felt like a violation. We tried to rationalize it. A localized blast of wind? An old tree finally giving way under its own weight? None of it fit the sound we'd heard. We eventually dismissed it because we had to. You can't just stand there all night staring into the dark. But the feeling of ease was gone. I quietly checked that my .44 Magnum was on my hip and that Cal's shotgun was leaning by the door where it always was. The night passed without further incident, but I slept lightly.
Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of leaves outside had me alert.
The next morning, things felt normal again. The sun was out, the birds were singing, and Brian was already complaining about the camp coffee. Down the trail, we could see smoke rising from Corey and Megan's campsite. They seemed to be doing fine. Cal and I decided to take a walk, to check our trail cameras and scout for deer sign. Brian, to our surprise, wanted to come along. I think the sound from the night before had spooked him more than he let on. We headed north, in the direction of the sound. About a mile from the cabin we found it, a deer, or what was left of one. It was a large doe, and she'd been killed recently. But it was the way she was killed that made the hair on my arm stand up. She hadn't been eaten, not really. She had been torn apart. Her rib cage was cracked open and splayed outwards like a flower.
Her spine was snapped in 3 places, the breaks so clean they looked like they'd been done by a hydraulic press. One of her legs was completely ripped from its socket and lay a good 15 feet away. There were no bite marks to speak of, no signs of a cougar dragging it to a cache, no evidence of a bear feeding. Just this brutal, explosive destruction. And the smell was wrong. There was the coppery scent of blood, but underneath it was a thick, musky odor. It was like wet dog, ammonia, and rotting meat all rolled into one. It was a predatory smell, but one I'd never encountered. No bear did this, Cal said, his voice a grim whisper. He was circling the carcass, his eyes missing nothing. No cat either. Look at the tracks. The ground was soft and damp under the furs. All around the doe were huge tracks. They were canine in shape, like a wolf's, but they were enormous, easily twice the size of any wolf track I'd ever seen. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. The tracks were in a bipedal pattern, 2 feet, one after the other. The stride was immense, at least 6 feet between steps. Whatever made these tracks had walked away on 2 legs. Brian was pale. He looked like he was going to be sick. That's not possible, he stammered. Take a picture, I told him, my voice flat. Get a clear shot of the tracks next to your boot. He fumbled with his phone, his hands shaking, and did as I asked. Cal found the source of the sound from the night before. A Douglas fir, about 14 inches in diameter, had been snapped in half about 8 feet off the ground. The wood was splintered and green. There were deep gouges in the bark around the break, as if from massive claws. Something had just walked up to it and broken it, an act of pure, pointless strength. We backed away slowly, the same way we came. We didn't talk. The woods felt different now, hostile. Every shadow seemed to hold a shape. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper.
Back at the cabin, we locked the door. "We need to tell the others," Cal said. "They need to pack up and get in here with us, or get out completely." I agreed. I took my rifle, a lever-action .45-70, and walked down to Corey and Megan's camp. The musky smell was faint here, too. I told Corey what we'd found. I didn't embellish. I just laid out the facts: the deer, the tracks, the broken tree. I showed him the picture on Brian's phone. Corey listened intently, his expression unreadable. Megan, who was sitting by the fire, grew visibly frightened. Corey looked at the woods around them, then back at me. "We've got rifles," he said, nodding toward his tent. "And I've got a sidearm. We'll be fine. Probably just some poachers playing a stupid prank." "Those weren't prankster tracks, Corey," I said. "And no man I know can snap a tree like that. You should come up to the cabin. It's solid." He shook his head. "We appreciate the offer, Ethan, but we'll be all right. We'll keep our eyes open." I argued for a few more minutes, but he was firm. I think his pride, his sense of himself as a protector, wouldn't let him accept that he and Megan were in over their heads. It was a fatal mistake. I told him to fire 3 shots if they ran into trouble, and I headed back to my cabin, a cold knot of dread in my stomach. That evening, we barricaded the door with a heavy table. We closed the heavy wooden shutters on all the windows and barred them from the inside. We sat in the dim light of a kerosene lamp, the silence in the cabin thick with tension. Brian was quiet for the first time all trip. Cal was cleaning his shotgun for the 3rd time. I just sat, listening. The sun went down, and the forest outside went completely black. The unnatural silence returned. It was around 9 o'clock when we heard the first sound. It was a soft, scraping noise against the west wall of the cabin, like claws being dragged slowly across the logs. We all froze.
Cal raised his shotgun, pointing it at the wall. I held up a hand, signaling for silence. The scraping stopped. Then we heard sniffing. Loud, wet, curious sniffs right outside the window. It was followed by a low, guttural chuffing sound, like a huge animal clearing its throat. The sound was deep, resonant, and it vibrated through the cabin walls. My blood ran cold. It was so close. Then a new sound, the gentle, metallic rattle of the doorknob. Something was turning it, slowly, deliberately, testing it. We all stared at the door as the brass knob jiggled back and forth. It was intelligent. It wasn't a bear pawing at the door. It knew what a doorknob was for. The knob turning stopped, and for a moment there was only silence. Then a heavy, solid thump landed on the door, making the whole frame shudder. Then another, and another. Something was shouldering the door, testing its strength. The heavy wood held, but the impacts were terrifyingly powerful. Brian let out a small, choked gasp.
Cal shot him a furious look. "Quiet," he hissed. The pounding stopped. A long, tense minute passed. Then, from the direction of Corey and Megan's camp, we heard a woman's scream. It was short, sharp, and cut off abruptly. "Megan," I breathed. We waited for the sound of gunshots, for Corey's signal. But there was nothing. Just the scream, then silence. A deeper, more terrible silence than before. We didn't know what to do.
Running out there would be suicide, but sitting here doing nothing felt like a betrayal. Before we could decide, the assault on our cabin began in earnest. A massive impact slammed into the front wall, shaking the entire structure. It sounded like a car had hit the building. Then another slam, this time against the shuttered window next to the door. The wood groaned, and I could hear the iron hinges straining. Suddenly, from the back of the cabin, we heard the shattering of glass. I had forgotten about the small pantry window.
It was high up, only about a foot square, but I hadn't thought to shutter it. A long, dark arm, impossibly thin and jointed at a sick angle, snaked through the broken pane. At the end of it was a hand that was almost human, but with long, yellowed claws that scraped against the inside wall. Cal didn't hesitate. He swung his shotgun around and fired. The blast was deafening in the small space. The arm recoiled with a wet, gurgling shriek of pain that sounded like nothing on this earth. It was a sound of both animal rage and intelligent agony. The thing outside went berserk. It let out a series of deafening roars, a sound that was part wolf howl, part lion's roar, and part something else, something metallic and grinding. It began throwing itself against the cabin walls with abandon. We could hear the logs creaking under the strain. Then came a new horror, a voice. It was a high-pitched, thin voice, mimicking a human. "Help me," it cried from the darkness. "Please let me in."
"It's me, Megan." My skin crawled. It was a grotesque mimicry. The cadence was wrong, the tone was flat and lifeless. It was a predator using a lure. "Don't listen," I said, my voice tight. "It's not her." Brian was starting to lose it. He was huddled in a corner, rocking back and forth, whispering to himself. The thing outside kept up the mimicry for a few minutes, calling for help in that awful, parroting voice. When it got no response, the rage returned. We heard a heavy, rhythmic scraping sound from the front of the cabin. I peeked through a tiny crack in the window shutter. In the faint moonlight, I could see a towering shape. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, with massive, hunched shoulders. It was covered in coarse, dark fur. Its head was long and canine, with a muzzle full of teeth that glinted in the moonlight. Its eyes glowed with a faint, sickly yellow-green light.
It was on its hind legs, and it was systematically tearing the heavy wooden shutters off the window frame with its long, powerful arms. I saw its hands clearly then. They were not paws. They were 5-fingered hands like a man's or an ape's, but ending in thick, curved talons. The sheer, brutal strength was horrifying. The heavy lag bolts holding the shutters in place were being torn out of the logs with shrieks of tortured metal. "It's getting through the front window," I yelled. Cal moved to the front of the cabin, shotgun ready. The last shutter was ripped away and tossed aside like it was cardboard. A massive, dog-like head pushed through the window frame, shattering the remaining glass. It opened its mouth and let out a deafening roar, filling the cabin with its hot, foul breath. That same smell from the deer carcass, only 100 times stronger. Cal fired. The buckshot hit the creature square in the face from less than 10 feet away.
It howled in pain and rage, recoiling from the window. But it wasn't down. It was just angrier. While our attention was on the front, a second one hit the back door. The wood splintered, the crossbar cracking. There were 2 of them. They were coordinating. They were hunting us. I fired my .45-70 through the back door, hoping to hit whatever was on the other side. A pained grunt answered, and the assault on that door paused. But the one at the front was coming back. It smashed the entire window frame inward, sending wood and glass flying across the room. It began to climb through. It was a nightmare of impossible anatomy. Its shoulders were too wide for the opening, so it had to turn and contort its body to squeeze through. Its limbs were long and spindly, but corded with thick ropes of muscle. Its legs were digitigrade, bent backward like a dog's, but it moved with a sickening bipedal fluidity. As it pulled its torso into the room, I fired the .45-70 into its chest. The heavy slug hit with a wet, solid thud. The creature staggered, a real wound this time, dark blood welling from the fur. It looked at me, not with the dumb pain of an animal, but with a look of furious, malevolent intelligence. It ignored the wound and lunged for me. I stumbled back, trying to work the lever on my rifle for another shot. It was too fast. It swiped at me with one of its clawed hands. The claws raked across my side, tearing through my jacket and shirt, slicing deep into my flesh. The pain was immediate and searing. I fell back against the table, the rifle clattering to the floor. The creature loomed over me, its jaws snapping, saliva dripping from its teeth. I thought I was dead. But then Cal was there. He slammed the butt of his shotgun into the side of the creature's head. The beast roared and turned on him, grabbing the shotgun in one of its hands and bending the barrel into a U shape with a single, effortless twist. It backhanded Cal, sending him flying across the room, where he hit the stone fireplace and slumped to the floor, dazed. The creature turned its attention back to me. It was then that Brian, who had been a whimpering mess in the corner, finally broke. He screamed, a high, piercing shriek of pure terror, and scrambled for the back door, the one that had been damaged. He fumbled with the broken bar, pulled it free, and threw the door open, trying to make a run for it into the darkness. He never made it past the threshold. The second creature was waiting. It was slightly smaller than the first, but just as horrifying. It grabbed Brian by the head and shoulder and just pulled. There was a sickening, wet, tearing sound, and Brian was gone, dragged screaming into the night. His screams were cut short. The creature inside the cabin was momentarily distracted by the commotion at the door. That was the opening I needed. I scrambled for my .44 Magnum, which was still in the holster on my hip.
I drew it, aimed at the center of the creature's chest, and fired all 6 rounds as fast as I could pull the trigger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The heavy slugs slammed into it. It staggered backward with each impact, roaring in fury and pain. It looked down at its chest, at the bloody holes I'd punched in it, then back up at me. Its yellow eyes were filled with a burning hatred. It took one more step toward me, then its legs seemed to buckle. It crashed to the floor, shaking the whole cabin, and lay still. I didn't wait to see if it was dead. I scrambled over to Cal. He was conscious, but barely. He had a nasty gash on his forehead, and his arm was bent at a wrong angle. "We have to go," I gasped, the pain in my side screaming at me. "Now! The other one!" We didn't need to finish the sentence. We could hear it outside, circling the cabin, letting out low, mournful, yet menacing howls. It was calling for its partner. Or maybe it was just waiting. I grabbed Cal's shotgun, the one the creature hadn't destroyed, and my rifle. I reloaded my Magnum and rifle as fast as my shaking, bloody hands would allow. We had to get to my truck. It was our only chance. "On 3, I said to Cal, helping him to his feet. He leaned heavily on me. "We go out the front. Don't stop for anything. Just run." He nodded, his face pale and grim. I took a deep breath, kicked open the splintered remains of the front door, and we plunged into the cold night air. The world outside was a terrifying landscape of shifting shadows and menacing sounds. The second creature was somewhere to our left, near the edge of the woods. It let out a roar when it saw us, and we could hear it crashing through the underbrush as it started to circle around to cut us off from the truck. We ran. Cal was stumbling, and I was half carrying him. The pain in my side was a white-hot fire, and I could feel warm blood soaking my shirt.
The truck was parked about 50 yards from the cabin. It felt like miles. The creature was impossibly fast. It burst from the trees ahead of us, a dark, hulking silhouette against the moonlit sky. It stood between us and the truck. It lowered its head and let out a low, rumbling growl that seemed to shake the very ground. This was it. We were trapped. I raised my rifle, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. Cal, however, was a step ahead of me. With a grunt of effort, he pushed away from me, lifted his shotgun, and fired the one round he had left. The shot was aimed low at the creature's legs. The buckshot tore into its left knee. The creature shrieked and its leg buckled. It didn't fall, but it was hobbled. "Go!" Cal yelled, shoving me toward the truck. "Get out of here, Ethan!" He turned to face the monster, using the empty shotgun as a club. The creature, enraged and injured, lunged at him. I saw it swing its long arm. I saw Cal go down.
I didn't see any more. I did what he told me to do. I ran. I reached the truck, my fingers fumbling with the keys. I ripped the door open and threw myself inside, slamming the door and locking it just as the creature, limping heavily, reached the vehicle. It threw itself against the driver's side door, the whole truck rocking on its suspension. A clawed hand smashed the side window, spraying me with glass. I jammed the key in the ignition and twisted. The engine roared to life. I slammed the truck into reverse, stomped on the gas, and spun the wheel. The creature was still clinging to the door. The truck fishtailed, and the monster was thrown off balance, its claws scraping long furrows down the side of the truck. I didn't look back. I straightened out and floored it, careening down the dark, rutted logging road faster than I ever had before. I could hear its enraged howls echoing behind me, growing fainter and fainter, until they were finally swallowed by the roar of the engine and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I drove for what felt like an eternity, my vision blurring from the pain and blood loss. I just focused on keeping the truck on the road. When I finally hit the paved highway, I pulled over, my body shaking uncontrollably. I sat there for a long time, covered in my own blood and shattered glass, the silence of the normal world feeling alien and fragile. I eventually managed to drive to the nearest town, which had a small hospital and a sheriff's office. I walked into the emergency room, and all hell broke loose. As they were stitching me up, 2 deputies arrived to take my statement. I told them everything. I started at the beginning and recounted every detail, just as I've told it to you. I was a trained observer, a former officer of the law. I gave them a factual, procedural account of what happened.
I told them about the tracks, the broken tree, the siege on the cabin.
I told them about Brian, Corey, Megan, and Cal. I told them there were 4 bodies up on that mountain. They listened with patient, placid expressions. They wrote things down in their little notebooks, but I could see it in their eyes. They didn't believe me. They thought I was delirious from shock and my injuries. The next day, the sheriff himself came to my hospital room. He was a big man with a weary face. He told me they'd sent a team up to the cabin. "We found your friend, Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Calvin Riley. He was deceased. The coroner is saying it was an animal attack. A bear, most likely. A big one." "It wasn't a bear," I said, my voice hoarse. "What about the others? What about the creature in the cabin?" The sheriff sighed. "There was no other body in your cabin, son. Just a lot of blood. Yours and Cal's mostly. We found the young man, Brian. He was further in the woods."
Bear got him too, it looks like. As for the other couple, Corey and Megan, we found their campsite. It was torn up pretty bad. Tents ripped, gear scattered. Found some blood, but no bodies. We've listed them as missing. "You have to believe me," I pleaded. "There were 2 of them. They were intelligent. They walked on two legs. Ethan, he said, and he used my first name for the first time, his voice softening into a condescending drawl. You've been through a terrible trauma. Your mind plays tricks on you in situations like that. We found bear tracks all over the place, big ones. It was a rogue grizzly, plain and simple. Got aggressive, went after the campers first, then came for you. You were lucky to get out alive. It was all neat and tidy, a tragic bear attack. The official story was set in stone before I was even out of the hospital. My report was filed away as the ramblings of a traumatized man.
The damage to my truck was from hitting a tree during the panicked escape. The bent shotgun barrel? I must have done it myself when I fell. Every piece of evidence that pointed to the truth was ignored, explained away, or buried. They closed the case. 4 people were dead or missing, and the official cause was a bear that was never found. A ghost. They issued a warning for hikers in the area, and then, within a few weeks, it was old news. Only one person ever gave me a glimmer of validation. It was an old deputy, a man near retirement. He came to see me just before I was discharged. He closed the door to my room and stood there for a moment, just looking at me. "I read your original statement," he said quietly. "The one you gave that first night." I just nodded, too tired to argue anymore. "You're not the first," he said, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "Over the years, we get calls. Strange sightings. Livestock torn apart in ways that don't make sense.
People go missing in these mountains, more than the official numbers let on. They just vanish. Sometimes we find a scrap of clothing, a boot, nothing else." He paused, looking out the window. "My advice to you? Sell that land. Don't ever go back up there. What you saw? Some things are best left alone. There are places on the map that are still blank for a reason." And then he just turned and left. He never said he believed me, not in so many words, but he didn't have to. I took his advice. I sold the land and the cabin for a fraction of what it was worth. I never went back. I moved away from the mountains, down to the coast. I thought the ocean might be big enough to drown the memories. It isn't. I have nightmares every night. I see those glowing yellow eyes, the teeth, the unnaturally jointed limbs. I hear Brian's last scream. I see Cal turning to face that thing so I could escape. The guilt is a physical weight that I carry with me every day. I lost my oldest friend, and 3 other people died because we were in the wrong place at the wrong time, because we stumbled into a part of the world that doesn't belong to us. I don't go into the woods anymore. I can't. The sound of the wind in the trees is no longer peaceful. Every snap of a twig sounds like a footstep. The familiar comfort I once found in nature is gone, replaced by a deep, primal fear. The world is not the safe, understandable place I thought it was. I spent my life studying and managing wildlife, operating under a set of known rules. But what I encountered that weekend obeys no rules I understand. It was something ancient, something that should not exist, and it looked at us with a hatred that felt deeply, horribly personal. I know that most people who hear this story will think the same thing the sheriff did, that I'm crazy or traumatized or lying. I don't blame them. It's easier to believe in a rogue bear than to accept that there are things walking in the dark that defy all explanation. It's more comforting to believe the maps are all filled in. But I was there. I have the scars on my side and in my soul to prove it. They exist. And they are smart, they are strong, and they are vicious. So I'm telling this story for one reason, not for sympathy, not for belief. I'm telling it for Cal, and for Brian, and for Corey and Megan. Their lives ended in terror and violence, and the official record is a lie. This is the only truth they will ever get. And maybe, just maybe, someone will hear this and think twice before they venture too deep into the wild, too far from the safety of the known world. Maybe they'll listen to that feeling of unease when the forest goes quiet. Maybe they'll turn back. Because you need to know that not all the monsters are in the fairy tales. Some of them are real.
And they're waiting in the dark spaces we've forgotten to be afraid of.